Hello, everyone. Hello, Josh.
Hey.
Well, you're the guy I couldn't interview when you were working for Skype, so this is good. I'm going to take all my revenge today. It's good to see you. Thank you for doing this, and let me kick off and ask you something. You know, everybody knows you as the guy who ran Skype for a long time. You fixed Skype, and you did a lot of things there. What were you doing before that? Where did you come from suddenly?
Yeah, so I actually started my career working for a senator because I thought the best place to change the world was in politics. So I worked for Bill Bradley for a few years in Washington, and then decided that I thought the private sector, and particularly entrepreneurship, is actually a much better place to change the world. So I ended up, at a public company for a little while to learn how to run something, and then founded a company which became Evite, and built Evite for a while, and then ended up selling that to Barry Diller. And that was, we founded it right in the middle of the internet boom, and sold it after the crash. And then I went to eBay and joined eBay with the idea that they could send me anywhere in the world that they wanted to. I wanted China. They picked Amsterdam, not quite what I'd thought. But ended up finding an opportunity for them in classifieds and getting eBay into the classifieds business. And so I built their online classifieds business in Europe for several years. Came back to the United States to run a company called Shopping.com, and then got the opportunity, the privilege, to go run Skype in early 2008.
Right, so you had a pretty varied life, different jobs. So how do you go from being an entrepreneur to working for a big company? How does that work out?
Yeah, it's a different skill set, but you know, I had the great good fortune at eBay to be the guy who ran things that were very independent, standalone businesses that weren't part of the machine, and that made life much more manageable for me. The one thing that I think entrepreneurship builds that's incredibly useful to bring with you into a big company is this sense of ownership. I think wherever you are, thinking like an owner and acting like an owner all the time actually causes you to build better businesses and deliver better results and be more courageous. And so hopefully that helped me a bit in eBay.
So if I'm a founder or an entrepreneur, and if somebody wants to buy my company, should that be a driving reason for me? Like if I'm going to sell my company to a big company, should I put really high up in the priority list that, you know, there will be an independent division where I will get to run things that should be high up in my priority list?
Hopefully you will all be facing these questions. You have built these very valuable businesses, and you have the good fortune to decide whether to sell or not. It's been my experience that companies that are left to run as standalone business units get to carry on their mission and carry on the brand much more successfully than companies that are really folded in and integrated. So I'm really thrilled that Skype is going to be a separate division of Microsoft reporting direct to Steve Ballmer. That gives me some confidence. But then again, every entrepreneur has to weigh, how much am I getting paid? What do I want out of my life? What does my wife or husband want from me? There's times when it builds a lot of value to have the company more deeply integrated.
Right. Let's take a step back to your first venture at Evite. You know, if I remember correctly, it was born during the height of the last, let's call it the internet boom. Let's not be negative. But then things didn't turn out as planned, and the company went through a down phase. How did you, as a founder, as an entrepreneur, handle the ups and the downs of the business at that time?
Yeah. The biggest difference between working for someone else and being an entrepreneur was how high the highs were and how low the lows were. That was incredibly, all of you know, right, different. I had the good fortune to have fantastic co-founders who continue to be dear friends of mine today, and for me that was a huge help that the three of us could really go through it together. I learned a tremendous amount on the downside. All the things we were doing wrong. For a company that's been successful, and since Evite I've then come in to run 3 other companies that someone else founded. And one of the great lessons I learned and took from Evite was when everything's going well, there's a lot of success bias that you're doing well because of all the things you're doing. And in fact, in every case, it's true that you're doing really well because of some of the things you're doing and in spite of some of the things you're doing. And the art is to tell the difference. And so now coming into companies and running them, having been a founder myself, I think I bring a lot of empathy for what it takes to build a business and why you have the privilege of fixing all the challenges, because businesses that grow really fast have a lot of operational issues. Having empathy for that is good, but also being able to really challenge a lot of sacred cows, a lot of conventional wisdom, and tease out the in spite ofs versus the because ofs. I learned a lot of that at Evite. In the downside, we suddenly had to cut a lot of staff, stop doing a lot of things, and it became very apparent once the market fell apart what were the because ofs and what were the in spite ofs. One more lesson that I had on that was never waste a good crisis. There's a crisis situation and there's a boiling frog situation. Do people in the room know the term boiling frog? I'll just in case you don't. I promise I haven't tested the theory. But I'm told that if you put a frog in water and slowly turn up the temperature, the frog never actually catches on and boils to death. That's a business that's a boiling frog business is actually a really difficult situation to be in, because getting the will for drastic change is really tough. Mm-hmm. And we've all seen plenty of boiling frog businesses out there. I'd argue eBay was one for quite some time. And actually a crisis situation where you can see that you're hitting a wall at 100 miles an hour is very liberating, because you suddenly have the opportunity to throw everything out the window and try something radically different. So when the internet boom burst, we suddenly were in a crisis situation. I laid off 60% of my staff. We dramatically focused the business on just doing a few things, and we actually got to break even in a very short amount of time and learned a tremendous amount in the process.
So why do we tend to make the right decisions in a crisis and not during the good times? What is it that as founders and entrepreneurs we should be avoiding in order to not make the mistakes of living the good life too much?
Yeah, it's super focusing, right? What do I need to survive? What do I need to build value for my customers in the next 6 months? And so we all talk about focus. I'm sure all of you as entrepreneurs talk about focus. What I talk with my team about is the vital few and the worthless many. So the worthless many are the 100 things you could do. And all of the worthless many are things that make sense, that are really valuable, and that you'd be proud to get up in front of your board of directors or investors and talk about and explain why you're doing them. If it's a dumb thing to do, it's easy and you're not going to do it. Let's cancel those. There's 100 things you could do that are all valuable, and those are the worthless many. The vital few are the 5 that you're actually going to do that deliver the most value, and the courage is to say no to the other 95 that are all good ideas. In a crisis situation, it's really easy because you're looking at your bank balance or whatever the crisis is. You really have a lot more courage than to say no to all of the worthless many.
Right. So what was your single biggest takeaway from the Evite, the boom to bust? You mentioned, never waste a crisis, super focus. But what is that one takeaway all of us can, learn from your experience?
There's several along the way, but I guess if we're talking about particularly the boom to bust, the biggest mistake I made was selling the business. We sold too early. We sold during the bust. And in reflection, I had never lost faith in the business. I always believed that Evite delivered a valuable service to people, had a great brand, and had a business model and a revenue model that was going to make it a sustainable, profitable business. As a young entrepreneur, when the world fell apart for us, I looked around and all of my comparable companies traded at a discount to cash, meaning if they had $20 million in the bank, they had a $15 million market cap. Investors just wanted their money back. And it felt to me, I was 29 or 30 at the time, like the world had come to an end. And the best thing I could do, the most honorable thing I could do for my investors was to give them their money back. And so we spun up an auction and we sold the company. And in hindsight, we had a business that was continuing to grow, that was doing fine, and I really still believed in the vision. And the business continued to do fine. And had we waited another 3 or 4 years, it would have been worth 8 times as much 10 times as much as we sold it for. Never would have been a billion-dollar company, but it's a good, solid, profitable, small publishing company. And so that perseverance, and particularly the ability to see that cycles come and cycles go, and to be really contrarian and look inside in your heart instead of looking too much at your environment, that was a big takeaway for me.
Right. So after you were a founder, you became a CEO of a unit, and then later CEO of a standalone operation. What is the key difference between being a founder and a CEO?
So there's a lot of special privileges that come with being a founder. The courage and ability to take very difficult stances, you really have that as a founder. You're usually the largest shareholder in the company, and boards are loath to fire founders, or should be loath to fire founders, because you simply can't go out in the market and hire another one. It's also been my experience that there's a certain insight that you get from being a founder about what your customers really want. I noticed with Evite that for myself and the other founders, you could ask the 3 of us 100 questions, put us in 3 separate rooms, and we'd have the same answer 95% of the time. And I think it's because in the earliest days, we were watching every single customer interaction with our product and learned so much from that really one-on-one customer interaction. By the time I came to Skype, we had 50 million customers. I'm obviously not doing that. It's become a large and diffuse business. And there's something about the soul of the business that comes from being there when there's 3 employees and you're talking to every customer one-to-one. That's just hard to replicate. The CEO is an employee. They're an employee. Board hires CEO, board can fire CEO. And as much as you want to be courageous, it's the very rare CEO that can have the same courage, that certainly has the same leverage as a founder has. The advantage that the CEO has is the outside perspective, the ability to really challenge a lot of sacred cows and challenge convention, and hopefully separate the because ofs from the in spite ofs.
So if you're a founder, how do you become a good CEO?
Yeah, great question. So for me, it was really valuable that I had worked in a few really good companies before I was a founder, because you're trying to build a world-class team. And everyone is saying, I'm hiring the best people in the world. Many of the entrepreneurs I meet tell me that they have the best CFO in the world. I've had founders look me in the eye and say, I have the world's best CFO. But they're 24, they've never worked anywhere else, and they have never met another CFO. So of course they have the best CFO they've ever met. They have the best VP of engineering they've ever met. The opportunity to surround yourself with greatness and know what the bar should look like so you can hold your team accountable to truly be the best. The easiest way to do that is to have worked in some places with really, really great leaders that you can benchmark and role model for yourself. There are ways to do that if you've been fortunate enough to be really successful without having done that, or you just don't have the chemistry to go work in a big company, which I totally respect. What I've seen people do really well is reach out to industry leaders and get good mentorship. If you look at Mark Zuckerberg, for example, he spends a lot of time with some awfully accomplished people and has gotten a lot of feedback about what world-class should look like on his team.
So if you were to give advice to people in this room from, who are transitioning, who are younger entrepreneurs, but transitioning to, building bigger businesses, 50, 100, 200 people, what are the things they should be keeping in mind as they grow their businesses? Like, what were the lessons you learned? Like Skype at 50 million customers, and now it's like 590 or 600. So let's not kid ourselves. There was a huge growth that happened when you took over and where it is today. During that time, what were the key lessons you learned when you found a company which was still in a hyper growth stage?
Yeah. Beware the tyranny of choice, I would say, is one of the first. So the tyranny of choice is getting back to the worthless many. And a real conviction around the very few things that matter is super important. Really surrounding yourself with the best in your team and holding them accountable. Building a system that allows for accountability in your organization. This is the biggest place after founding Evite, I've now come in and run 3 others, companies that were, that had very successful first acts. And I think the thing I've seen people go wrong the most in is as you're scaling the company, allowing way too much matrix and way too much the way that, if it's a software company, the way the software is built, the way the organization is designed, so that it's really hard to hold any individual accountable. Most things that need to get done in the company require 2 or 3 or 4 different people on the executive level to work together to accomplish it. That's just not world class. And if you think about what are the 3 or 4 things that have to be done super, super well, building a system from the top down that allows you to have one person whose butt is on the line to be held accountable for that, I think that's probably the most important thing for scaling a company really well.
Right. One of the things or challenges I have seen writing about startups is the founders not being able to scale with the company. In a sense, you have this idea and there is purity of your vision, and then the company grows to become something bigger, and you suddenly realize that there are market forces at work. There is, data-driven MBAs are going to show up because that's how businesses get scaled. Like, how do you reconcile as a founder with something like that? I am sure there's a lot of people in this room who are either facing that challenge or will face that challenge in the next 2 or 3 years as their businesses grow.
So hopefully before you've founded your business or early in your career, you've discovered the few areas where you truly have a spike. And what I've seen is that there isn't a pattern. Right now it's very in vogue that the CEO be a technologist who is great at product. I do think product's an awfully good spike if you got to have one, but you see plenty of examples of great leaders who are not necessarily product people or engineers. But I think in every case, they know what they're really good at. That should be something that does really matter for the business. They involve themselves really deeply in that, and they hire great people for everything else and know to hold them accountable but to pull out. And I think that's key. I do think for a founder, there should be a really important role in the company for setting direction of the company, understanding what the customer wants. But it's rare that their skill set will be rounded enough to be deeply involved in everything. And many of the founders I see where they go wrong is they try to be too involved in too many places.
Guilty as charged, so what can I say? But I think the one thing which I do find pretty interesting is you and I have never had a chance to do many on-the-record conversations, but we've talked privately a couple of times, and you've always given good advice on how one should think about leadership. And I particularly remember one story you told me about how every action you take as a founder has a big impact on the outcome of the company. Can you share a little bit of your insight into that and share that anecdote you did, because that really helped me think a lot about my business and how I worked with my team.
Sure. So you have these seminal moments that are lessons for I do. So one of them for me is as Evite was really getting going, at some point I turned my desk from facing this way to facing that way. And my secretary came to me and said, "Everyone's convinced you're selling the company." I said, "Why would they think I'm selling the company?" And they said, "Well, it used to be that when they walked past your desk to the door, they could see what was on your screen. And you've turned your desk, and now they can't. And as a result, there must be something you want to hide. And if there's something you want to hide, it's probably that you're selling the company." Now, the truth is that my lead database administrator was a 52-year-old Chinese man who really believed in feng shui. And having the CEO's back to the door, he was literally losing sleep every night. It was a very easy thing for me to fix so that this poor man could sleep better at night. But the lesson I took away from it is that when you're the leader of an organization, people are watching every single thing you do. They're interpreting into every body language you have. How often are you on the phone? How often are you stepping away to conference rooms? So smiling every day, carrying yourself with confidence and conviction, all of these things about what people want in a leader, it's really important. It's part of the job. It's actually an important part of the job.
Well, that's easier said than done when things are not going well.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I don't know. I mean, it's like.
Yeah. I've had a lot of hard days. I'm sure everyone in this room has had a lot of really hard days. And for me, my wife has been a really essential partner. When I was at Evite, I was lucky enough to have co-founders who really, we could go and commiserate together and balance each other. And when someone was down, the rest would bring us up. But I don't get the luxury to have a bad day in the office, to really feel pessimistic and down on the business. I can do that at home with my wife, but my employees, my job is to show conviction and direction and really make sure that people feel led. Actually, my favorite, I don't know if any of you have read, there's a wonderful book about an explorer who gets stuck in the Arctic, and all of a sudden I'm going to blank on the name, the Endurance. I don't know how many of you read Endurance. It's the best leadership book I've ever read. It's amazing. If you guys ever get a chance, this crew are stuck in the Arctic, and this is way before cell phones, right, in the mid-1800s, and their ship has wrecked. They're on an iceberg in the middle of 1,000 miles of iceberg, and there's no one around, and there's effectively no chance that they will survive. And the captain leads the crew through 19 or 20 months of this and saves every single one of them. And at every turn, he's making decisions. And some of them are terrible decisions. And when I say terrible decisions, like the boat's wrecked, right? So now you take the lifeboats out and haul them full of gear and food across the ice to try to find water that you can put the lifeboat in and go someplace. And you might haul that for, let's say, 2 weeks, only to find that you've hit a mountain, have gone in the wrong direction, and now have to haul it back, 3 weeks in another direction. That's a bad decision. That's painful for people. But at every turn, he made a decision, thought a lot about the composition of the team and how they were bonding and working together, and just kept people moving forward. And in tough times as a leader, that's what you got to do.
So can you share some of your tough times and some of the tough decisions you took and what we can learn from there?
Yeah. So I would say, well, when the internet bubble burst at Evite, that was really tough for me. But another one that was really bad, probably even worse. So on behalf of eBay, I'd gone off to Europe and identified classifieds as a good business, and particularly this company, Marked Plots, which is like the Craigslist of the Netherlands. I thought was an amazing brand and amazing business, and I'd convinced Meg Whitman, the eBay CEO at the time, to buy the company for 220 million euros. It's a company with 10 million euros in revenue and 5 million euros in profit. It was a big bet on the belief that I thought we could do an even better job running it than the founders, who, by the way, I think are fantastic founders and had done a good job. So we bought the company, and about 5 months later, a competitor launched. So when we paid so much money for this company, it suddenly became clear that the largest media company in the Netherlands had really missed it, right? And they were under tremendous pressure for their shareholders for how could they have missed the online classified opportunity. So they threw absolutely everything they had into launching a competitor to us. They launched a better product than ours, I thought. It was completely free, where our product had some fees. And they used every asset they had, TV, radio, print, and magazines, to market the hell out of this company. And within a few months of launch, it looked like they were going to be bigger than we were. So I had to go back to San Jose and tell Meg Whitman, remember that company we just bought $220 million because with my name on the door? Well, it looks like we're about to get beaten. And you can imagine how that went over. That was one of the worst days of my life. And particularly flying home from that meeting really felt awful. And on the plane ride home, I wrote a list of these are the 7 things we need to do to win. We need to have a better product defined as, if you list it on our site, it needs to sell faster and for a higher price. We need to have better search engine optimization, so our results show on Google better than our competitors. We need to have the perception of being bigger than they were. We need to have better customer support, et cetera. There are 7 of them. I came back, and this is in the never waste a good crisis. The big lesson for me in this, never waste a good crisis. I came back to my team, and the day I landed, reorged the entire team. So these are the 7 things that matter. I know you all have job descriptions, and we've talked about career development paths, and I've moved some of you to unusual places so you can get development. All that's out the window. The only thing that matters now is winning. And so your job is now this, your job is now that, your job is now that. Each of you have a clear goal and a clear metric I'm going to hold you accountable with. Here's the team you've got. Come back to me in 2 weeks with a plan for how you're going to win. And I wasn't sure if my whole team would quit, kind of what they would do. They all really stood behind us as an organization, put the company first, and we kicked ass. And 2.5 years later, our competitor actually exited the business completely. And it's one of the really the proudest moments of my life was to see how the team rallied together to do that. It was really exciting, but it wouldn't have happened had we not faced this competition and this crisis. And we ended up challenging a lot of sacred cows and doing a lot of things dramatically different than we would have done otherwise. The other big lesson for me in that is how good competition is. Our customers benefited greatly because of this competition, and our product got suddenly radically better, and we got rid of a lot of fees and replaced it with advertising. And guess what? Turns out we could make more money with advertising than we could with fees. And our business became 10 times more profit. We grew revenue and profits tenfold. We vanquished a competitor and did that all while lowering our fees, and it worked out really well. But man, did it feel bad when it was happening.
So the lesson there was make tough choices, streamline your product, and basically, essentially disrupt conventional thinking.
I'd say if you can think about your business as always about to be disrupted and act as if you were always in crisis. I don't want to say that. That's not right. You don't want to act as though you're open. But when you think to yourself, if I were in crisis, how would I be acting? And then question, is there a reason I'm not doing that now? I think that's something I try to do about once a year, really ask myself, if my business was dying, what would I do different? And how many of those things then should I be doing anyway? The other thing is, again, the super clear accountability, the super clear, this is absolutely the vital things it takes to win. Let's get rid of everything else. This is what it takes to win. And then an owner that has clear accountability and the ability to move unimpeded to achieve that goal.
I think my personal take on this, as somebody who's seen a lot of startups, I think as the companies grow older, right, they go from 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, I think for some odd reason, the desire to fail is inversely proportional with the age of a company. And a lot of the startups, I think, hit the wall mostly because they just don't want to be, lose at something. They just want to win at that one little thing they do, but they're not really willing to win by betting really big. And I think that is a consistent problem I have seen with 3 to 4 year old companies. I think MySpace is a perfect example of a company which couldn't get out of its own way. Yeah. And even though it had the right idea, it had the music, it knew music was its future, and it just wouldn't go there because it wasn't safe to do. I mean, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, MySpace was really unfortunate because that was just all execution. First, it's way easier to be the attacker than the incumbent. It's a great luxury to have an evil empire, which you were going after, especially if it's big, because if you can get 5% of their market share, you can usually build a big, successful business. And having a single identified evil competitor you're going after, it's a wonderful thing. When you're forging something new, it's also exciting, but it's harder because you're not sure exactly who the benchmark is. MySpace was really, well, I guess they were taking over Friendster. If you do get the kind of traction that a Skype or a MySpace or someone else gets, and the competition that displaces you looks like you, shame on you. That's really a poor execution play. But where I think companies tend to get complacent is they think we own a market now, we've created a market and we own it. And the only competition they're looking after is the competition that looks like them. So I'll give you an example. eBay thinking that their competition is other auction marketplaces, right? And there's no other auction marketplace that can compete with eBay, or so it felt. And so at times it stops taking risk. And MySpace and all these companies, I think where they really start to lose is they stop taking risks. But if you think about the value you provide to customer in the right way, you start thinking about competition really differently. In the case of eBay, the value it provides is putting a buyer and a seller together. It's got nothing to do with format. It's about putting a buyer and seller together. And suddenly, Google looks like a competitor because it's another way for a buyer and a seller to find each other. Craigslist is a competitor. And I think it took a while for eBay to realize that because, again, it thought about itself in terms of a feature or a tactic rather than a value proposition.
Value proposition. Let's, from that perspective, let's talk about Skype. When you took over, I think the persistent question I had for your team was, when is the Skype for mobile going to come out? I know I hounded you and everybody else in 2007. I was saying, hey, when is Skype for iPhone going to come? It was the best video I ever did when you didn't speak anything, right? But at that point, there was institutional hatred towards the idea of Skype on mobile. Yeah. How did you convince a very core engineering group that mobile was the way to go? Like, that's something, even as a founder or as a CEO, you may know what is the right thing to do. Convincing the people who make it happen is much harder. Yeah. So how did you do that in getting Skype onto this whole multi-screen, track? Now they're in every device. They want to be in every device.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine now, but when I arrived at Skype in 2008, early 2008, it was really controversial about whether Skype should be on a mobile device. And the idea was, well, we provide communication and phones provide mobile phones provide communication, so it's kind of duplicative, which struck me as insane. That they would think that. But the biggest problem was because they weren't sure that they wanted to do it, there was no owner for Skype on the mobile. This was the thing that shocked me. There wasn't a Skype for mobile team. So no team felt like it was necessarily within their mandate. And yeah, it's important for the future, but it's not what I need to deliver to hit my goals in the next 6 months. And when you're 12-person companies, you don't face this as much. But by the time you're on 200 or 200 people or more, a lot of really important decisions get made by middle management who are really focused on what their goals are. And it's really only the CEO that has the luxury to be outside looking in and say, where is the world going? What should the goals be? And then really leaning forward and holding the business to account for where the future is. And so the first realization I had was that of all the different teams, none of them owned mobile as a really front and center thing. And so it was like priority number 3, 4, and 5 on a whole bunch of people's lists. So I created a division that was mobile. I made the leader of it report to me, which was a little kludgy with the org chart, because theoretically we had a consumer division and mobile's part of consumer. But I really wanted to signal how important it was to the organization. So I brought in a new leader and I let him hire a new team. And pretty quickly, the other parts of the engineering organization started to feel competition. Well, I want to build some of those products. Those are really cool products. And why do those guys get to work on the iPhone, which is now really cool? So step one was really building an organization whose sole purpose was to go win at that.
So how did you convince the team? Like, was it just the signal that you had hired this guy and he was reporting to you and he was going to hire other people? Was that a subtle way of sending message to the rest of the team? Or did you communicate with them? Like, what was it was there any, explicit act on your part that made the company just turn around?
It was very explicit conversation. So one of the problems that Skype had, and maybe some of your companies have this, is too much consensus management. A couple of things. Way too many decisions needed to get made by consensus. And too many decisions, the discussion happened outside the room. So you'd all get together and talk about mobile, and then everyone would go off and say, those guys are smoking crack. It's never going to happen. And there was a lot of vetoing by fiat. The engineers would say, yeah, sure, and then they just wouldn't ship it. So what I did about that was to really structure decision processes inside the company where I'd insist on a white hat, black hat. So for important decisions like should we launch a mobile product, I'd assign someone to be in charge of the we should and someone to be in charge of the we shouldn't. We'd get the key decision makers in the room together. We'd really hash it out. I'd let them hash it out because as the leader, I don't want to be in the debate because then I'm perceived to be biased in the debate, but have the chance to really hear other people have a good, hard debate about the product, about the decision, listen with as unbiased a mind as I can, and then come in and say, I've heard you both, or I've heard the team, and now here's what we're going to do. And on mobile, as well as many other things, just driving discipline around once we can disagree, but once I've made a decision, we commit.
Right. So I see there are 3 lessons in the story you just said. One, you got to have, basically people who have ownership of a certain product. That is how you ship great products or new products. Number 2, every decision has to be a binary decision. The company, whether it's 2 people or 200 people, has to have a very binary approach to everything, either yes or no room for like grays. And the third lesson you're saying is that let people debate amongst themselves before you pass your edict. You're almost like a judge saying this is where I'm leaning. Those are the 3 good takeaways from that?
That's much better said than I could say.
No, I'm a blogger. My job is to compress it. So.
The only one I'd caveat a little bit, and I know, and I can often take a lot of compression. That's a good benefit. The binary one I'm not as, I think for something like should we be in mobile, that's really important. The company needs clear direction on it. There's times when you say, let's put a toe in the water and I'm going to commit this and let's see if we can hit that milestone. If you can hit it, you get the right to go forward. If you can't, we're going to kill it. You know who does an awesome job of that is Mark Pincus, right? He's got very clear milestones. The team develops a game, and if they can hit a certain milestone, they get to continue, and if not, that game is killed and we go on to another one. So I think both of those techniques can work. I think an even better example than mobile was actually Skype 4.0. So when I arrived at Skype, Meg Whitman had been talking about Skype 4.0 as the future of Skype. It was going to be our new platform. And so my first week in the job, I called the leadership team of 4.0 together, and I asked just one question: what are we solving for in this product? There are 8 leaders, and I got 8 different answers. And my favorite being the head of design, who said, a great product. And as I talked with the team about it, they were evenly divided. Half the team thought we'd never ship it. It was too complicated, it was too big a project, we couldn't do it. The other half thought we should never ship it. It was an absolutely terrible idea that should be killed immediately. And so what we did there is I gave the team a very clear mandate about what the product should be about. It should be about engagement, and it should be about video. So we want people to use the product more often and longer, and we're going to put video as the front and center of our experience and really differentiate our product. They had until December 31st to ship the product, and I would break every process in the company to get them whatever they needed. They had carte blanche. Anything they needed, they would get. So kind of no excuses. The last problem was is this a terrible idea? And for people who use Skype a lot and would remember, I'm sure you do, but going from 3.8 to 4.0 was a really big change in user experience. You went from this very small, narrow experience to this really wide experience. And there were a lot of people who felt like it was too big a change, and the customer couldn't accept the change. And there was a big lesson I'd learned at eBay about that, which is eBay had done incremental change for years. They'd been afraid to get too far ahead of their community, so everything was just one hue different than the last. And when you do that, it feels really good for 6 to 12 months, and your customers love you because nothing changes. And 3 or 4 years from now, they discover that they have the same product they had 3 years ago, and someone else comes and changes their expectation such that what they thought was awesome a week ago, they now think sucks. So sometimes you really need to be willing to lean forward and get ahead of your customers and take risks when you know it's the right thing to do, but you don't want to be stupid about it. So what we did is we set up a way to test it where we put a beta in the field for the first time, where we forced a beta on 1% of our customers that they didn't ask for. And we had all these ways to measure what they were going to do with what they actually did with the beta once they got it. And sure enough, 98 out of 100 people that got the beta hated it for the first 3 days. And 2 weeks later, loved it and didn't know what they'd ever do without it. And it took us 3 iterations. The first product sucked, the second product sucked less. By the third beta, it was actually better than the first, better than their old experience by a wide margin. And so when we launched 4.0, the first few days, we got a lot of negative press. And I mean, if you look back to the press, there was a lot of negative press about 4.0. But we had the courage of conviction to say they're going to love it. We just need to give them a couple weeks. And that product had a really big impact on the trajectory. When we look at the growth of Skype, 4.0 really worked and was very important to our history.
For the record, I'm still using the old one. Just saying, I'm in that reluctant.
You're in that
upgrade.
2%.
Yeah, sure. But you talk about changing people's expectations. I'm glad you've lived up to my expectations. Thank you for making time for all of us and sharing your knowledge. So I think the red light is blinking, saying we gotta go.
Thank you.